You're listening to That Gratitude Guy podcast with David George Brooke. That Gratitude Guy. Learn about how gratitude turns what you have into enough through stories of motivation and inspiration. Wherever you are in your life and whatever you're going through, That Gratitude Guy is here to help you achieve great things and live a happier, healthier life. Change the way you live today right here with David George Brooke. That Gratitude Guy, starting now.
Well, hi, everyone. It is David George Brooke, That Gratitude Guy with the Gratitude Guy podcast. I want to welcome all of you aboard. This is my third podcast, and it's just kind of as a reminder as I've gotten started to let people know what you can expect. I always think that's kind of a neat thing to do. We have a lot of really inspiring and interesting guests that will be sharing some motivational stories. There'll be some examples of gratitude's immense power. I'll always try to have a gratitude tip of the show to leave people with, either that or a gratitude nugget, a little deeper dive into gratitude and what it kind of takes to become a gratitude believer. Those are kind of the followers, I think, that really understand and want to embrace and illustrate what gratitude can do for you. The podcast is on Transformation Talk Radio on the first and third Fridays of the month at 12:30 p.m. And as a reminder, I do gratitude keynote speaking and gratitude coaching, and you can reach me at thatgratitudeguy.com or thatgratitudeguypodcast.com. And then my email is david@thatgratitudeguy. So my guests will discuss many ways that they have incorporated an attitude of gratitude into their life. So let me get on with the show without further ado and introduce my first guest today, or my guest today, I should say. Faith Ireland is an American lawyer and former judge in the state of Washington. A native of the state, she was a county trial judge for 15 years before serving as an associate justice for one term on the Washington Supreme Court from 1999 to 2005. She's also a world champion powerlifter, something we'll talk about a little bit. And since completing her term, has worked as a private mediator and appellate consultant. She was born in Seattle, Washington, and raised in Burien, and graduated from Highline High School. And following high school, went to the University of Washington, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree, and then on to Willamette University College of Law, where she got her Juris Doctor. So very, very talented and intelligent woman, somebody I've gotten to know recently. In fact, with that, Faith, welcome to the show, and mention how you and I met, as a matter of fact.
Well, I got to see you speak at Seattle Rotary, one of the largest and oldest Rotary clubs in the world. And it was just great because I just couldn't believe how well you managed the virtual speaking. And that takes special talent to do that. And so I followed up with you and asked you to do some coaching with me about virtual speaking, and being very, very helpful to me.
Excellent. And it sure did change given the pandemic, with everything that happened. We went from mostly in person to very little virtual to almost 90%, if not higher, virtual and very little in person. It is kind of changing and starting to come back a little bit. I've got some speaking gigs in later 2021, which will be back in person, but it'll be kind of a hybrid. But the thing that I mentioned with my guests, and I always want their perspective, and I just respect you so much. And then of course, your perspective is even that much more important to me. So I like to talk about how gratitude impacted somebody's life. So what did serving on the bench sort of do to change or alter your view of gratitude and how you look at people, I guess, and the situations that you were presented with as a judge?
Well, I think one of the most significant things was the advice that I got from my mentor when I became a judge. And he was a wild and crazy guy. He was a trial attorney from Eastern Washington. He had been president of the State Trial Lawyers Association. His name was John R. Lewis. And he's not with us anymore. He hasn't been with us since the 90s, but his words ring in my ears. And one of the things he told me when I became a judge was, in relationship, especially to criminal defendants, he said, don't talk about what the past held. Talk about what the future holds. And it was a very insightful thing for me, because even when you had the victim's family there, and then someone from perhaps the defendant's family, I would talk to both families and thank them for being there, let them know that I was grateful for having them there to support their family with their victim and also the family of the defendant because the defendant was going to need their help to become rehabilitated. And so with the defendants, I always talked about what's ahead, what you can do to restore yourself to what you would like to be in life. And I got a wonderful uh, compliment in that regard. I received something from someone who had been a defendant of mine. It was 5 years after the fact, and it was his 5 year little medallion that he had gotten from, I believe, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he also told me that he was about to, he had just finished his work at Seattle University to be a substance abuse counselor himself. And he
Wow.
credited me with something I said when he was sentenced. And I, of course, did not remember that. I didn't remember what my words were, but I was very grateful to get his gratitude. And it really encouraged me to work in that way with families, both of victims and defendants.
Excellent. And it's such a great aspect of kind of ties in with gratitude because I tell people you focus on what you have versus what you don't have. And gratitude turns what you have into enough. But I think it must be interesting when you said not focusing on the past and talk about the future. Did it take some getting used to that? Because the reason they're in front of you is because of their past and the things that they've done. And now they're being sentenced or onto whatever situation they're going to have to do. Was it tough to kind of transition into that to really focus more on the future?
Not so much, not for me, it wasn't, but there was something in particular that my mentor said, and he said, and I knew this from other work that I had done, but it was an important reminder. Remember that you are judging the conduct, not the character of the person.
Hmm.
And I found that that was, extremely helpful in many, many respects when in the practice of law, and not just in criminal law, but also in civil law, to say we don't know the character of the person, and we should give that person's character the benefit of the doubt. We do judge their actions, and there are consequences from the actions. So we are judging what they did, but we aren't necessarily making a judgment about that person and what they can become in the future.
Interesting. And did you notice over the course of, gosh, 15, 20 years on the bench, did you become a little bit, I don't want to say softer, but a little bit more understanding when you were trying to see the character instead of the conduct?
Well, I think I had another person who asked me. He agreed to be my treasurer when I was running for office the first time to become a judge. I had been appointed by the governor, but I had to run right away. And one of my colleagues, one of my classmates from law school, agreed to be my campaign treasurer. But he said, "You have to make me one promise." And I said, "Sure, what is that?" And he said, "Promise me you will not become cynical as a judge."
Mm,
And I said, "Oh, okay." And then I had to think about what that meant. How did I do that? And what I found was the perfect way to keep from becoming cynical was to have young lawyers working with me at all times as interns if they were in college, and then later when I was on the Supreme Court, new lawyers. They didn't necessarily have to be young, but they had to be new,
hmm.
so that I was seeing the law through the eyes of the beginner again, because we are very idealistic when we become lawyers. And it is easy to become cynical if you focus on all of the negativity.
Right.
Having the young people around me, young to the law around me, helped me to keep from being cynical my whole career.
Hmm. And when you were talking about too the character, what's an example of something where you could say, I really get that about not judging the conduct, but the character. Can you give me an example of a person, not by name, of course, but there's something where just their actions were, their conduct was reprehensible, what have you, but it turns out later their character really kind of shined through and maybe it was a tough situation?
Well, I would say the person who sent me his 5-year pin,
Oh, wow.
who went on to become a substance abuse counselor himself, and to return to other people what he had been through in terms of rehabilitating himself. So that is what I say. But for the most part, no, you don't. You don't really have the opportunity to follow people on. They come before you and then they're gone. And unless it's a case that when you're a trial judge, it goes on to a court of appeals or something. But we don't see how people end up their lives. But we need to give them the benefit of the doubt that they are going to, if we don't start with an expectation that they are going to reform themselves, how can we expect them to? If we prejudge them to be a loser their whole life, what's likely to happen? Likely to be a loser. And so I always believed in trying to motivate people to make their life better.
That's excellent. I heard a song earlier today and I was doing some errands on the radio, and it's a gentleman by the name of Danny Goki, and it's called My Best Days Are in Front of Me or Ahead of Me. And he's a young man that was on American Idol, and his wife, I think it was his wife, died like right before he was in the finals. And I don't know if he won or what have you, but it's just the lyrics are just so great about really, you've had a few things happen in the past, but really what's important is the days in front of you. And people have often said, well, what are the two most important days of your life? And I've heard today and tomorrow. Today is I'm present with Faith Ireland here. It's this very moment. That's all we have is this moment. Yesterday's gone and tomorrow is yet to come. But then I also heard somebody say the other day on a podcast, ironically, they said the two most important days of your life were the day you were born and the day you find out why. And I thought that was kind of cool. And so for what a great segue, I could talk to you about the law all day long, but we've only got 25, 30 minutes. Talk about the powerlifting and I want to see how, speaking of my best days are in front of me, you did this a little bit later in life than people traditionally would. So talk a little bit about that, Faith, and then how gratitude kind of figured into that as well.
Well, when I was young, I grew up in the 50s, and little girls didn't do athletics. If you went out, and I had two brothers, if I went out and tried to throw the ball with my brothers, they'd say, get out of here, you can't throw. And my mother would say, come over here, you're not supposed to be doing that. That's not ladylike. And so I grew up, and even when I got into high school and we had PE, I was not thrilled with PE. You had to get your hair messed up. And, uh, you know, sometimes you had to sweat, and I didn't like that at all. So I was not an athlete. The thing I did want to do was learn to ski, and so soon I couldn't afford to ski when I was in high school and college. And so as soon as I became a lawyer, that was my first order of business, was to learn to ski. So I learned to ski, and so when I look at my life and what are the really important things in my life, athletics was important in that way, but I never thought of myself as an athlete. Well, I was in a car wreck at the same time as I became a judge. Just in 2 weeks of being appointed, I was hit and run rear-ended in downtown Seattle. And I had neck and back problems that went on for years and years after that. I had a lot of occipital headaches right at the back of the neck and so on. And then one day, in the 90s, this was 12 years later, I heard a juror who was being asked questions on voir dire talk about his back injury. He said, I mostly overcame my back injury by lifting weights. I had tried everything, including lifting weights, and it hadn't helped me. But then he said something significant. He said, I found I had to kind of disobey my doctor's orders, which was to work up to the point of pain. And I thought, yeah, that's what my doctor told me. And then he said, I found I had to work through the pain. And I thought, aha. So I went to see my physical therapist that I'd been working with, who was leaving town or something about that time anyway. And I said, I want a referral to a gym where there's a physical therapist also nearby. And so he referred me to a club very close to my courthouse. And at that club, there was a person by the name of Willie Austin who was a power lifter. He said, I want to warn you that this place is a magnet for power lifters. And I said, oh, that's okay. I'll stay out of their way. Well, careful who you hang with, right? Because after a couple of years of, really it took about 2 years to overcome the worst of my physical problems. But I felt relief within 6 weeks. And
Wow.
I would be driving home and I would start smiling and I'd say, why am I smiling? I didn't see anything funny. I didn't hear anything funny. And then I realized pretty soon that that was the endorphins kicking in.
Wow. That's so cool. That's so
Right.
cool.
So then Willie Austin had a program where he worked with inner city youth. He was African American, had been an African American athlete and star. He played football at the University of Washington, was a power lifter, and so on. So he was very interested in making sure that minority kids and inner city kids got the chance to have physical fitness in their life, whether they'd be picked for some team or not. And so these kids were Willie's kids, we call them. And there was a foundation that was started called the Austin Foundation, which exists to this day. Unfortunately, Willie Austin died sometime, 8, 10 years ago.
Oh,
But
wow.
his work goes on, and he engaged me in that work. So I got involved with the young people who were learning to powerlift. And then he said, it's your turn. Excuse me. So he said, I want you to do this powerlifting meet. We're just going to do a little meet here at the gym. Well, careful who you hang with, because that turned into 15 years of powerlifting all around the world,
Cool.
and five or six world championships and 15 world records for small old women, if you will.
Wow. So definitely another mentor for you. You mentioned John Lewis earlier. So this Willie, what's his last name? What was
Yes.
Willie Austin? Yeah, gosh, and that's something that's always so important. I know you've mentored a number of people, and for us to have mentors along the way, and then to mentor people too. And speaking of which, I don't want to run out of time without making sure I ask you a little bit about the powerlifting your life. Because speaking of powerlifting in the coaching program, and how to powerlift your 2021 life is one of your programs. And can you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yes, I have a program that I do. It's actually based on Mary Morrissey's programs. She is the founder of Brave Thinking Institute. And when I had cancer a couple of years ago, I got great fatigue as a part of the cancer. And a friend recommended me to Mary Morrissey's online programs, and I started doing those. And I really felt my spirits lift. I felt the fatigue lift, even though I was still in the treatment. So I jumped in with all fours into the programs that she was teaching, and actually decided that I liked what she was doing so much that I wanted to become a life empowerment coach as well. And so I became certified as a life coach, and I've been coaching. And one of the things that I talk to people about is using a number of ways to envision, design, and create or build, if you will, the life you love. Not just the life you like, but the life you love. Because one of the things that we find is that, for instance, 5-year-olds use about 98% of their imaginative capacity.
Mm.
And if you ask them a question, they can give you an answer that you would never have thought they would give you,
Mm-hmm.
because they can give endless answers to any given question, because they
Mm-hmm.
are what the researchers call divergent thinkers, and they can think of so many things. Well, what do you think happens by the time we get to be 20? Do we get that extra 2%?
Don't,
No,
don't think so.
down to 2%.
Wow.
And what happens in the meantime? School. So
Mm-hmm.
when the kid goes to school, they're told, stop daydreaming, and they're asked to pick the correct answer. And that's called convergent thinking. So by the time we're 20 years old, we have become convergent thinkers, and we're not, unless you're required to do so in your work, you're an artist or an architect or something like that, you're using your imagination every day. But for the rest of us, we kind of get into a comfort zone of figuring out the right answer and always doing the practical thing. What's practical?
Mm-hmm.
What can I achieve? For
Yeah.
instance, in goal setting, there's that term SMART, which stands for um, specific, measurable. A stands for attainable. R stands for relevant, and T stands for timely. So you've got these guidelines and these goals. Well, when you're looking at building a vision of the life you love, you don't have any of those restrictions. You can think in the way that a 5-year-old would think. What's possible? What's out there? What do I love? So a lot of people ask me, a question, how do I know what I would love? Which it's kind of an odd question. Wouldn't you know what you love? But
You think so? You think so?
actually,
Yeah.
actually a lot of people really don't, or they're
Mhm.
or they're not attuned to thinking in that way. They're attuned to thinking in what can I get, not what would I love. And so a friend of mine was telling me about a class that she'd gone through some years ago where the person teaching the class had them keep a little notebook and to write down every day what they loved, what they thought of that day that they loved. And then they would all compare notes about it. And the
Oh,
variety
nice.
so endless, of what things made people come alive. And to me, that's the measure. The first thing to think about is what makes you come alive? I mentioned skiing. Skiing
Mm-hmm.
is the thing that so much made me come alive. This year I couldn't ski because of the pandemic. And then I got my vaccination. So I went up skiing and I was kind of cranky by the time I got up there because with all of the things that went with the pandemic, it took so long to get everything together, get to the top. Then when my skis snow and I felt the silk and I started to glide and
Oh,
then
nice.
glide and I went, yay! And oh, it was just like my life started again. And it was so exciting to be skiing again. That's the
Oh,
thing, that's one of the things that makes me come alive. And it's
that's right.
especially important because I met my husband skiing 40
Mm,
years ago. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary
wow.
skiing in Park City.
That's
So
excellent.
so those are the kinds of things that when you really put your aliveness and your imagination together, you can envision a life you would love, not just like, but love.
Exactly. And we only have a few minutes left, but I would be remiss if I didn't have you talk a little bit about gratitude and your daughter. And tell the listeners in just a couple of minutes is all we're going to have time for. But just tell them a little bit about your journey with your daughter, which is just lovely.
Yes. Well, I had an incident when I was in my first really big life failure was when I was in college, and that is that I got pregnant out of wedlock, as we said in those days, and for various reasons I decided to give my daughter up for adoption, and so I did, and I wanted her to have a father as well as a mother because I was so attached to my father, and I just felt that it would be the best thing for both of us. And then 32 years later, my daughter and I were reunited, and
Ah,
that was
lovely.
21 years ago.
Wow.
So I have had the fairy tale ending to what was at the time a very humiliating and anxiety provoking situation. And so I am not only grateful for being reunited with my daughter, who is my only child, and but also because now I have a 17-year-old grandson
Oh,
who
wonderful.
graduating from high school and starting college next year. So that is like the fairy tale ending.
Well, that's why I think that's why I'm so fascinated with your life too. Because when we think about gratitude and we take the personal side, the professional side, things that we've done in our lives, and just to know that journey you went on to be reunited, it fascinates me because I think, gosh, 30 plus years, and there you are, and now you get to look ahead. And we were talking earlier about not focusing on the past, but focusing on the future, and look at that future with a grandson. I mean, just how great is that?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's really neat. So we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. You have an offer for some coaching, I believe, that I wanted to have you mention to the listeners.
Well, yes. If anyone wants to contact me about having a life assessment done, I would be willing to, for the first 3 people that would email me, I would be willing to do that life assessment on a complimentary basis. And
Excellent. And the email is?
the email is faith@faith-ireland.com.
Excellent. Excellent. And I mentioned too, thank you, Faith. And it's been great having you, by the way. This half hour always flies by. I can't get over it. I've always promised a gratitude tip, and the gratitude tip for today is something I do in my talks, in my presentations, is take a moment today to text somebody in your world, text, not telephone or anything else, text somebody in your world and tell them how grateful you are to have them in your life. And please use the word grateful. You will be surprised about some of the answers that you will get. So, and then as I mentioned too, or as Faith mentioned, that's faith@faith-ireland.com for her coaching, free, complimentary rather, coaching session. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. I want to just mention a couple of things for a second time. We are broadcast on the first and third Fridays at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And please let me know where your favorite places are to get your podcast. And when you access the podcast on your preferred place, please subscribe. And then if you like what you hear, give me a 5-star rating. I would really appreciate that. And as I mentioned too, I do gratitude keynote speaking and gratitude coaching, and you can reach me at thatgratitudeguy.com. My guest next time will be Ryan Pauly. I'm staying in the legal side of things. He's a successful attorney representing personal injury victims in the Seattle area, and he will share some great stories on how gratitude inspired and encouraged him along the way as well. And I told Faith when I met her, I come from a long list of attorneys. My brother, my uncle, my father, my grandfather had all of these people. In fact, my grandfather inspired me like no other. His life has gone by fast. Faith and I have talked about this before in our conversations. He practiced law. He died at 99. He practiced law to 97. And he was still going to the office every day in Spokane. So I thought that was so cool. And it definitely encouraged me to just, what's the word retire mean? So please stay tuned following my podcast for the Empowered Through Health podcast with Diane Solano, where you can take your health to the next level, featuring a different health topic every week. So Faith, thank you again very much. I really appreciate you being on. And until next time, I am David George Brooke, that gratitude guy. Remember, be grateful and never quit. So long.
Thank you for listening to That Gratitude Guy podcast with David George Brooke, where living with gratitude turns what you have into enough. Transformation starts now, and you have everything you need to achieve great things. In a world that is constantly changing, there is motivation and inspiration right in front of us, and you can find yours right now. Don't wait. Visit thatgratitudeguy.com to get started living with gratitude today.